Welcome on in, Saints fans. Inside Black and Gold, Steve Geller, Jeff Nowak, still continuing our post-draft breakdown, getting into Jeff's roster projections already, you madman.
I always look forward to doing it early because it's a lot easier to do it early than it is to do it late. But I do like to get a quick jumping off point for these roster projections right after the draft, because there's going to be changes. There's going to be stuff that we feel like, okay, we're going to look at this guy. But first off, Steve, let's talk about how was your draft? How was your draft experience?
Pretty good, being on location at three different spots. They fed us well. Hanging out with the crew is obviously awesome. And Mike Detillier, Deuce McAllister, just a encyclopedia wealth of knowledge when it comes to any backstories on these draft picks that end up going, whether it's with the Saints or someone to other teams. Happy it's over, though. It's always a long, tedious haul that you're always at the end of it. You're always spent.
Yeah, Mike has what I think the correct word would be an encyclopedic knowledge of these. It's like you type in a name and it's just like
pops up. Yeah. I asked him, what's funny is one of the breaks yesterday on Sports Talk, I asked him, I'm like, do you have one of those photographic memories or something you see it once or you read it and you just pretty much retain it? And he's like, yeah, it's something along those lines where he watches a guy, hears something, sees it, reads it, writes it down or whatever, and it
never forgets
one of those great recalls.
Yeah, it's like it's to the point where it's like, is he making this up?
Right? How the hell you know all?
How does he know about this guy? When did he have the time? But I know what was your best snack? What was the best snack over the 3 days of draft coverage? You had three different places.
I'm not gonna lie, the food at Hooters was banging.
They give you
really
wings.
Enjoyed it. They had this chicken tender sandwich on Texas toast, and they asked me what sauce I wanted on it. Ended up getting garlic parmesan, and I was like, my eyes I grew huge. I felt like with my first bite, I couldn't believe how good it was. But Hooters was definitely awesome, and even Rouse's they put out the spread for us with meat pies, boudin egg rolls, and fried chicken. So I had no complaints at all.
I'm big on the boudin egg rolls, but I think the Saints had the kind of the boudin egg rolls of drafts here. So before we get into the roster projections, which we're going to do, segment 2 is going to be the offense. Segment 3 is going to be defense, special teams. I wanted to get into a couple things that have happened. I think once you get through the draft, you get a better idea of what the needs are. You also get past the point signing free agents will count against your compensatory pick formula. And we have arrived there now. So if you're wondering why were they so quick to sign a couple players after the draft? It's because once you get past, I want to say it's April, I think it's May 1st that you can start making these contracts official. I can't remember. Either way, we're past it now. So you don't have to worry about, hey, this is going to take away a compensatory pick. And I think they will get 1 7th round pick for Zach Bond, I want to say, in that formula. But either way, we have a couple signings, so we'll go through them here. Then I want to talk a little bit more about Spencer Rattler in this opening segment. We're going to hear a clip from his interview on WWL, just to kind of dive into, okay, let's pump the brakes a little bit, and we'll talk about it. But first, okay, so the Saints have signed, I guess technically hired, but in NFL parlance, it's signed, 2 offensive line veterans. You have Shane Lemieux, who is a guard / center option.
Sounds like a hockey player.
He does sound like a hockey player, yeah. An Oregon guy, went to the Giants, and I think the 5th round of the 2020 draft. He's going to be an option to potentially start or compete to start at that left guard spot. And I wouldn't bet against him just because he's going to give you some value on the roster in the sense that he can play center. So he will be a built-in backup to Eric McCoy if you need it. Obviously, you have the same situation with Caesar on the other side, but I think you'd only want to have to make one of those moves if you can. So I think he has some built-in versatility that will serve him well. And then he's going to be competing most likely with Nick Saldiveri, who is the second-year guy that you took in the 4th round last year and still remains a mystery to a lot of us because we just did not see enough of him to get a good read on what he can do. They also signed Justin Herron, who's an offensive tackle. He was drafted in the 6th round by the Patriots, also in 2020. Spent the last couple of years on the Raiders, started a few games. I think he'll be in the mix on the left side with Oli Udoh obviously Trevor Penning to kind of compete for that job, or if not compete for the starting job, compete for that backup job. So just some more depth on the line. Josiah Ezerum, obviously the 7th round pick, will be in that mix as well. But I do think on the right side, you're looking at Taliesin Fuanga, Landon Young, Ryan Ramczyk in that rotation. So I think Heron will probably be on the left side, but we don't know. One other signing, and these were all kind of needs. You came out of that draft feeling like you needed to beef up the line a little bit with some veterans. Also the safety position. The Saints signed Will Harris, former defensive back from the Lions. I think he was a 3rd round pick out of Boston College. He's been in Detroit for 5 seasons. Now he arrives. He'll be kind of a guy who can compete for that safety spot, right? We're going to talk about safety. On my roster projection, I'll have to update it with him because I only had 2 safeties getting cut because they really don't have a ton of safeties. They have a lot of DBs, but not a ton of safeties that especially ones that you'll cut. So he'll kind of slot in there, and he has played nickel. So I think he'll be a good option at the nickel spot. And he'll probably be a guy that you put alongside an Ugo Amadi and say, hey, this is a depth option that could beat him out. But otherwise, I think that's, you might see another signing or two. Another Boston College guy, one of the UDFAs, Kyle Hergel, was the number 3 pick in the CFL draft by the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So it's going to be an interesting decision to make for him. I don't know how that works in terms of, can you go and be a UDFA for the offseason and still go and take that roster spot with the Roughriders, or do you have to make that decision now? So we'll see. But either way, I think that's kind of the roster. And what were kind of your takeaways, your early takeaways on the draft, the UDFA class, some of these signings? How do you feel about where the roster stands right now?
Man, I couldn't believe post-draft how much media members nationally were just so high on the Saints draft. I'm used to that negative, kind of input. But I guess post-draft, it's hard to really dole out any D's or F's to anybody because we really still don't know what's going on. Overall, though, I like the Saints draft a lot. Obviously, you got what you needed round 1, that offensive tackle in Fuaga. I thought Kool-Aid McKinstry, great value there for the team. And another guy with great value that I think has been blowing up, you mentioned we're going to talk about him, in Spencer Rattler. To me, the reports of why he fell in the draft were completely ridiculous. To hear that a 17-year-old on a Netflix series, they're judging his character or his attitude in that, I find hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing about the grades at this point is it's kind of like, when we talk about PFF grading your mock draft, right? How are they grading it? It's usually, well, we had this guy at this spot and you took him at this spot. So you got great value. And I think that's why I don't always take the draft grades to mean a ton, just because right after the draft, you are not grading on quality per se, you are grading on value. And the longer you get down the line, the value matters less and less, and it becomes how high of a quality are these players. It doesn't necessarily, once you're 5 years down the road, no one cares whether you were drafted in the 3rd or the 5th round. The question is, can you play? So that's why the immediate grades are kind of silly, but that's the reason the Saints got high marks from the places they got high marks, is they not only got quality players, but they took them in spots where the perceived value is a good one. Right. You could say they drafted Fuaga later than he should have gone. You could say they drafted McKinstry later than he should have gone. You can say they drafted Rattler later than he should have gone. The other guys you can probably make a debate on, although I think they did get a good deal on Christian Boyd. And so that's kind of where you're at. Now, the next question becomes, okay, how good are these players? Right. And that's not something that we can determine right now. But I did mention, so we're going to talk about Spencer Rattler. I did want to play cut up of some of his answers from when he was on WWL with you at the draft special shortly after his pick. You're on with yourself, obviously, Deuce McAllister, Mike Detillier, Mike Haas. But I thought that he handled the post-draft questioning very well. A guy who just, you can say, hey, is the maturity there, right? But at the end of the day, you either think he's acting or you think he's being genuine. And I think it's harder than you'd think to put on a show for your football life. Like, you are who you are. And I thought his answers were pretty good. So let's hear them.
took a top 30 visit with the team. How did it feel? How did it go with them? Obviously, the team felt very highly of you to make this pick.
Yes, sir. No, the visit was amazing. I had a great time down there, just talking ball, getting to know the coaching staff, GMs. It was a great visit. Had a great feeling after leaving there and knew they would be in the mix, and, really happy they picked me.
A lot has been talked about the transition that you made from Oklahoma over to South Carolina, and I think the biggest thing that a lot of people will say is he matured. He matured not only as a person but as a player. Talk a little bit about some of the things that you tried to kind of change from getting your feet wet and then actually being in the college game for a little while, and just how that all went for you.
I think you naturally just grow when you experience a little adversity. I look at it as a blessing in disguise. Everything happens for a reason. God already had the plan written out. So I wouldn't change a thing, from my past, from my career. But I think just experiencing a little adversity in college, that helps you grow, and I call it a natural curve of growth in every position you need to grow in. So when I made that transition to South Carolina, I wanted to come in and acclimate with my new teammates, not force anything early, just naturally kind of work my way into there and gain their trust and respect through my work habits. So I'm going to have the same mindset coming into the Saints, learn as much as I can, stay humble, work as hard as I can, and just gain their trust and respect.
Spencer, Mike Detillier from WWL. First of all, congratulations. Deuce and I were talking about the whip you have as a passer. Is there a baseball background with you? Because it almost comes out like a baseball shortstop or pitcher, the way it comes out like clean over the top. So is there a baseball background with you?
I played baseball all the way up till high school, was shortstop pitcher, but I've been playing quarterback since I was 7 years old, just have always been able to throw that ball. My dad said, I wanted to play receiver when I was 7, but I was only around. So, kind of naturally fell into that role. And then, was lucky enough to get with my quarterback coach, who's still my coach to this day, Mike Giovando. And I've been with him since I was 11 or 12 years old. So we've been trying to perfect everything throughout the years and find new techniques, ways to get better, cleaner, faster. So mechanically, I feel very good about my mechanics. So, I credit that to coaching and God-given ability.
Spencer, one of the things with you is a lot of guys are arm throwers. But I see the way you set up and you use that lower body to create that power in your throws. And that's something that's sometimes not natural with a quarterback because they just want to rely on their arms so much. But you've developed that mechanics of using that lower body to generate that power for those tight throws.
Yes, sir. You can't be an all-arm thrower. I think that comes with, I played all sports coming up, baseball, basketball, football, and you got to use your lower half in whatever you're doing, especially being a quarterback. You can even talk about golf. It's the same type of lower body mechanics with your hips, legs. So I feel like naturally just throughout the years of working at it and then, kind of just that being my motion. You don't have to be the biggest and strongest guy to rip a 45-yard post in there or throw it 60, 70 yards. You got to use that lower half and have good mechanics and a little God-given ability. So, definitely want to keep using that lower half and getting it stronger and stronger.
But yeah, like I said, I thought his post-draft approach, his post-pick approach, it sounds he gives all the right answers to all the questions, and I think you should be excited about Spencer. I think the reasons, if you are really worked up about the QB1 documentary,
right,
fine, but I don't think that should impact your perception of what he can be as a quarterback. And I think he did kind of pay the price for kind of that immaturity, and he went to South Carolina and everyone kind of gave up on him. But, that player is still in there, that top end mechanically sound quarterback is in there. And I do think that, the ceiling of Spencer is higher than you would typically expect for a 5th round pick. That said, some of the reaction, some of the, immediate, like, we got our franchise quarterback is kind of insane.
Right. Please settle down on that part.
And I only say this because you can do whatever you want. Be excited. I like the fact that people are excited. It's frustrating to me when people don't get excited about things they should get excited about because they're so aggrieved at things that don't go the way they want them to go. Right. Like there's a lot of people who refuse to even get excited about anything because, until Dennis Allen is fired, I don't care.
I can't stand that. Right.
that's just a lame way to be about the team that you support, right? Like, if he gets fired, he gets fired. But like, if you can't look past that to at least enjoy the game, then I don't know. That's not fun for me. That said, I do appreciate that people are excited about Spencer Rattler, and I think that there should be excitement about Spencer Rattler. But understand that this is not a quick thing. This is I had someone try to tell me it's not a project pick. I'm like, no, and yes, it is. Any 5th round quarterback is a project. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going in the 5th round, regardless of why you think they fell. He's a project quarterback. If you're not a project quarterback in any way, you go in the 1st round or the 2nd round. Once you get out of that range, yes, you're a project. You could be a project with high expectations, but you're a project. And I only say this because it's like, be reasonable with your expectations so that you're not disappointed when reality happens. And this is a guy competing for a backup job, right? Like, that's where he is right now. He's competing for a backup job. And that's where the Saints feel he is.
I am excited about, obviously, for training camp, that battle between Haener and Spencer Rattler for that potential number 2 gig. Yeah, nobody's earning the starting job of this year.
And you're not handing the guy the backup job. He's got to earn it.
Right.
And the thing is, like, this is how the Saints feel. And you know that, because if they didn't feel that way, they would have traded up for him. Like that. Like, I understand, like one of the reasons it's a high value pick in terms of the value you were able to save is because you waited and took him at 150. But being willing to do that is also telling, right? They didn't do that with Haener last year. They traded up to get Jake Haener.
No, it rather like, if we can get him, we'll get him. And he's there for us.
Exactly. They were like, if we can get him, we will get him, but we're not going to lose sleep if we don't. And if the team was looking at him as like, oh my God, he's going to be our starter of the future, then they wouldn't have been complacent. Now, they still like him. Right. They still have high hopes for him. But this idea that they drafted him without the idea that he would be a project is silly. And if you're approaching it with that and you're saying he's going to be the starter this year, he's going to show up and blow the doors off everybody, you're just going to be disappointed. And you're not going to, and I only point that out because you're not going to give Spencer a fair shot to develop into the type of quarterback that he could potentially be, because you're so upset that they're not throwing him into the fire right away. Now, one thing that I have said previously, and I do believe this, you should, if you're the type that thinks, hey, Spencer Rattler can be the guy in 2-3 years, then you should be thanking Derek Carr for being the sacrificial lamb, because you can't do that unless you have a sacrificial lamb. Seriously. And I mean this. Like, you don't have Pat Mahomes without Alex Smith, or at least not the version of Pat Mahomes that you were able to see because he was able to sit and learn at the NFL level, right? You don't have Aaron Rodgers without Brett Favre, or at least not the version we saw where he was not hamstrung immediately by the fact that rookies struggle in the NFL. Jordan Love, same way. So, like, unless you're a team that's willing to devote a couple years to a, veteran quarterback who you're going to try to win with, but you're going to develop his successor in the background, then it's really difficult to develop a successor in the background. So I think that that's a situation that, the reason the Saints have Spencer Rattler is because they're in a situation where they can develop a Spencer Rattler. Not every team is like that, right? Like, if you are in the top 10 of the draft and you want Michael Penix or Bo Nix, you're not drafting Spencer Rattler in the 3rd or 4th round because you're developing that guy. So I don't know. Like, I'm excited about the Spencer Rattler pick. I am. Don't take it as me not being excited about the Spencer Rattler pick.
Oh, you're a hater.
But be realistic with your expectations. And understand that they're not just going to give him the backup job either, because he's going to have to beat out Jake Haener for that job. And you should want that. You shouldn't want a team that's just like, well, we drafted that guy, so we're going to give him the job. You should want him to have to be that guy and compete for that job. And that's what's going to happen.
Also throw in there, there's still some young guys that have some NFL experience with Kellen Mond and obviously Nathan Peterman. I'm hoping both of the younger guys for the Saints who they drafted are able to beat them out, though.
Yeah, I disagree on the. I think Spencer Rattler, what it does do is really lowers the ceiling on what you can hope for with a Kellen Mond. Like, it just wouldn't make any sense. And so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he comes out and does blow the doors off these other two guys, and you consider, hey, maybe we just go with Kellen Mond. But you know what? Like I said, when Kellen Mond was competing with Jake Haener, I felt pretty good about Kellen Mond's prospects. I don't feel the same way with him in a three-way competition against Haener and Rattler.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So,
I mean, the Saints QB room is suddenly the deepest I can recall going into this training camp.
How do you get all these guys reps?
I don't know.
Like, is Nathan Peterman just going to be back there, like throwing the ball back to the quarterbacks that are actually passing? Like, how do you do that? But we'll see.
They'll be warming up with the meaty on the side. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, like, he might as well be an assistant coach at this point. Like, how are you going to actually get 5 guys reps plus Taysom, who you should want to get some quarterback reps? Like, if you expect him to throw passes in games, he needs to at least practice that. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle it. But I do think like Kellen Mond and Nathan Peterman effectively kind of become tutors in this environment where, it's probably not fair to them, but hey, you're getting paid, help these guys learn the offense.
Yeah, and just like anything, you want it bad enough, show it.
Yeah, true. But all right, let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about the offensive depth chart, my initial way too early 53-man roster projection. We already talked a good bit about the quarterbacks. We'll get into a little bit more on why I have it set the way I do. Final segment, we will do defense and special teams. But this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller. You can follow me at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow Steve at Steve Geller, WWL. You can follow the show at Saints_pod. Who dat? Let's do it. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak along with Steve Geller. As promised, we'll be going through my initial way too early 53-man roster projection. So I'm going to share my screen here if you're watching on YouTube. Give me 1 second.
It's good. You get your projection out before anybody else does, so that's awesome.
That's my goal. That's always my goal. To be the first. What hasn't other people done yet? And we'll go from there. I haven't actually posted it online yet, so that's why it looks the way it does. But the context of it is completed, so we will go from there. As you can see, it's in a draft, but it's not going to change. The projection itself is not going to change. Only I just need to write a paragraph to explain what's going on. But all right. So the thing that I'll say off the bat here is, and I think this is telling of the depth of the Saints roster right now. This was probably the easiest projection I've ever had to do in terms of getting to 53. I did not have a lot of difficult decisions, and pretty much everyone who you expect to be on the roster is on the roster. I didn't cut any of the rookies. And I basically was able to keep all of the veteran free agents that were signed this year, sans 1 or 2. So we'll start with quarterback, and that's what we obviously talked a good bit about at the end of last segment. So we don't need to get a ton into it right now. The only kind of questionable thing that I did here was I kept 3. And this is a bit of a cop-out because I don't think you have to keep 3. And I don't think you necessarily want to keep 3 because it'll allow you to keep an extra name down the line somewhere. But again, even keeping 3, I was able to basically get everything I wanted to get done without making any two super difficult decisions. There are a couple difficult decisions, and we'll get to them, but nothing crazy. And to me, the scenario where you end up keeping 3 is you want to keep Spencer Rattler, but you're not necessarily comfortable with the idea of him being your in-game backup as a rookie. And that may be true, that may be not true, but I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility when you consider the Saints' track record of not going with young quarterbacks as the backup. They could have done it with Ian Book. They didn't. They could have done it with Jake Haener last year. They didn't. They always had a veteran as a backup, whether that's Andy Dalton, whether that's Jameis Winston, whatever. And so I think that tells you a couple things. And one of those things is they don't want to be in a situation where you're forced to throw in a rookie quarterback in a backup spot. He doesn't do well. It kills their confidence and kills your chances in a game, right? You want to be able to trust your backup to go out there and win. And I think there's a scenario where you feel like Jake ends up being your best option in that role but still want to keep Spencer as your developmental guy. And maybe he's the backup in 2 years, right? So we'll see. But right now, I'm going to go with that because I don't want to necessarily make a decision between Jake and Spencer before they get on the field. Because I do think you're going to give Jake a shot. Like, I get it. The coaching staff, the offensive coaching staff that drafted him is gone, or that was around when he was drafted is gone. But, he's still going to get an opportunity, and they liked him for a reason. Like, Mickey Loomis was here. Jeff Ireland was here. The folks that scouted him and felt like he was a good fit for this team, they could still feel that way. And, I think Nick Underhill reported he spent this offseason working with John Gruden. He should come in with a good understanding of what's going to happen. And I think it'll be a good litmus test for how Spencer kind of develops as a rookie, because you have Jake to be kind of that control. But at the same time, I don't see a scenario where Spencer gets cut. I do see a scenario where you only keep two and Spencer's that guy if he really balls out and you feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, it'd be tough to think that if you put a Haener or a Rattler on the practice squad, they would be able to stick there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue. And you saw that even with Ian Book, because they cut him and he got claimed by the Eagles. Like, you can't operate under the assumption that guy makes it to the practice squad. He might, it's not a given that he gets claimed, but it's also not something that you can say, well, we're going to throw him on the practice squad and develop him there, because he might not get there and then you lose a guy. But again, like people want to dive in and say, well, Spencer Rattler is the no-brainer selection here. And it's like,
how do you
know? They were more confident going up and getting Jake Haener than they were getting Spencer Rattler. So, right. I think Jake probably ends up dealing with the same thing Kellen Mond dealt with in 2021 or 2022, when after Clint Kubiak got fired, or after, Mike Zimmer got fired and Clint Kubiak went with him. Kellen Mond, who was a third-round pick, was kind of put out to pasture by the new coaching staff. I think that is the likely scenario, but we do need to see it play out first. And I'm not gonna say Jake doesn't have a chance, which is what I would be saying if I just put Spencer on that line before ever even watching him throw a pass in the Saints offense.
No, you brought it up though. It is going to be interesting just because, it is a new offensive staff who weren't in the room banging the table to go get Haener.
Right. All right. So we're going to go down here. And so we talked about, okay, keeping that extra quarterback, it takes away numbers from another position somewhere. And you just have to decide where that is. And for me, that's going to be at running back / fullback, because I'm only keeping 3. I'm keeping Alvin Kamara. I'm keeping Kendre Miller. I'm keeping Xander Horvath as the fullback. Now, you could probably throw Adam Prentice in there and be happy with it. I think Derek Foster, the new running backs coach, is going to bang the table for Xander. They were together with the Chargers, and it's just going to make sense. I think he's more versatile than Adam is in terms of being able to go out and catch a pass, and I just think that's going to end up winning the day for him as fullback. The guy that does not make this list, that is probably the direct consequence of keeping that third quarterback, and so it could change, is Jamal Williams.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
It is and it isn't, right? Like, for me, Jamal did not do what you needed him to do in the role that you brought him in for last year. And so as I'm doing this projection, it's based off that. It's based off, if the guy that we saw last year shows up and is the same guy this year, he's not making the roster. And you're not tied to him for too much. He signed a 3-year deal, but you could get out of it prior to this season, and it wouldn't really harm you from a cap perspective. I would expect him to land somewhere else. I don't think that he would end up on the practice squad, but we'll see. Either way, like, I just don't see it from him, at least based on last year. Now, this could change, right? Like, a lot of this is based on looking back instead of looking forward. And if we go out to training camp and he looks sharp, he looks fast, and you can say, hey, that hamstring injury he suffered at the beginning of last year really, really slowed him down, made it difficult for him, and you never saw the form of Jamal Williams that you expected, but he shows you in camp that you should be confident that he could get back to that, then I bet he sticks around. But for right now, I'm keeping him off there, and so I'm only keeping the 2 running backs and the fullback.
Yeah, obviously, too, the offensive line didn't do the run game any favors last year.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. All right, next position. This one's a little more complicated. and it's wide receiver. I'm keeping 6 guys, right? And it's pretty easy at the top. Wide receiver, 1, Chris Olave, then Rashid Shaheed, and then A.T. Perry. I think those 3 guys are very safe. And then it becomes down the line. Now, I didn't cut any draft picks, which I already mentioned. And I think 5th-round draft picks are tough to – like, you want to keep them around. You're motivated to keep them around. When you get a little later, the 6th-round guys, the 7th-round guys, yeah, it gets a little shaky. If you remember Jordan Jackson from a couple years ago, he ended up getting cut, a defensive tackle out of Air Force. He was a 6th-round pick. So I think those guys are a lot closer to the UDFAs than the guys you might have taken in the 5th round. But in this case, I'm keeping Bub Means. And so he's probably, I have him at the bottom of this list. He's probably the 4th guy that I'm definitely keeping. Past that, I think Stanley Morgan, you brought him in for a reason, and that reason is special teams.
Yep.
So a lot of times you'll see kind of a running back who is a core special teamer and is safe on the roster. We saw that with Dwayne Washington for several years. This year, I think that guy's going to be Stanley Morgan. He's a wide receiver. So that's going to add a number there, but it's one that you would dedicate to special teams. And then you have to decide on that last spot between a couple veterans, Cedric Wilson, Equinemius St. Brown, in my opinion, are the 2 options. And I think you invested just a little bit more in Cedric Wilson since you brought in Bub as kind of that blocking guy, as that bigger body guy. I think that kind of makes Equinemius a little redundant in that way. So, and Cedric is a little more versatile. He can line up in the slot. He can do a lot of things. And he also is more familiar with this Clint Kubiak offense coming out of Mike McDaniel's scheme with the Dolphins. So I think he ends up beating that out and winning that spot. So that's why I'm going with these 6. And I kind of feel like, obviously Stanley, if he doesn't end up being that core special teamer, would open up a spot, but I don't think it would end up being an extra wide receiver. I think if you don't keep Stanley Morgan, you probably keep 5 wide receivers. And so this list, I feel pretty good about this list. I think this is the list we're going to end up with at the end of the day.
I will say, I mean, I don't know much about him still, but a guy like Jermaine Jackson obviously has that return ability. Interested to see just what exactly he's able to bring to this Saints squad.
Yeah, Jermaine Jackson, he's 5'7". He's in that Deontay Hardy build.
Right.
He's 100% a return specialist. We talked to him the other day, and he compared himself to Demarcus Robinson, as another guy who's just been a return specialist in the NFL for a while. I think he's a guy that you throw in the practice squad. Like, he's not a guy that's going to get claimed. And I think you just like having an extra return specialist on the roster if you need him. I think this is it's not the most difficult roster to make at some spots, but I do think it's going to be a difficult roster to make at wide receiver for some of these UDFAs. But again, these are guys you could stash on the practice squad and feel good about in terms of developing them and continuing. And I think Kyle Sheets is another guy who I feel good if I can get him on the practice squad. I don't think he's going to get claimed on waivers. So you'll go from there. But yeah, Jermaine Jackson is every year you bring in at least one, right? Last year was Malik Flowers. The year before that was Rashid Shaheed. Prior to that, you have obviously brought in Deontay Hardy. I think it was 2019. And he really kind of owned that role. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
And you pointed out earlier, obviously the new kickoff rule change is going to be interesting because you need 2 this year, 2 returners.
You need 2 returners. But again, I say again, we hadn't talked about this yet, but Kool-Aid McKinstry could be that extra returner.
Sure, right.
And I think he should be that extra returner. So I think you already do have those 2 guys because you're going to be looking for ways, assuming you don't trade Marshawn, for Kool-Aid to impact the roster, and that would be one of them. And it's an elite part of his game. I don't see why you wouldn't. It's not like he's going to be playing every down when everyone's healthy. So it's just an opportunity to get him on the field. So that's going to hurt Jermaine's chances in that you don't necessarily need that wide receiver to be that extra return specialist alongside Rashid Shaheed when you have Kool-Aid.
Makes sense to me.
All right. So moving on, tight end. This is another position that you probably could justify keeping another guy. I have Taysom Hill here, even though he's listed as a quarterback. I still think of him as a tight end. So when I look at the tight end room and I have them keeping 3 guys, he's one of them. If you put him as a quarterback, that makes it more complicated in terms of, hey, okay, maybe you can keep an extra tight end, but the numbers don't get easier because you're still, you're either keeping 3 or 4 quarterbacks and you have to figure it out. Dallin Holker is a guy that a lot of people will want to see on these roster projections. But you mentioned this morning. Okay, see this year's Lucas Krull.
It feels like it, right?
Every year banging the table for Lucas Krull. And I like Lucas Krull, but it's just tough. Rookie UDFAs are tough to get on a roster. It's a 53-man roster. It's difficult to take. A lot of times they're not ready to contribute that early in their career, and it's going to take a year or two on a practice squad to get up to speed because there's not that many reps. You don't get that much practice time anymore with the new CBA and all these limits on what you can do from a practice perspective. So that hurts some of these guys' ability to get those chances to develop. So we'll see. I think Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau are safe. I think Taysom Hill is safe. And it's just going to be, hey, can you keep a fourth tight end? Will that fourth tight end be able to be a core special teamer? In which case, yes, you probably can. That's a good question. But for now, I'm just going with Juwan, Foster, and Taysom. And I do think the decision not to invest a lot at tight end this offseason is telling in how they view Juwan Johnson. And I think the message is, hey, last year didn't go the way we hoped for him, but it did end the way we hoped it would start. And we're hoping that this season looks a lot more like the end of last season. And I think you give him, this is the second year of that extension he signed. And I think it's just a situation where, hey, okay, we're going to give you one more shot at it. Let's see what you can do. And if it goes like it did last year, then, maybe it's time to move on and invest a little bit more in a top end tight end. But for now, I think Juwan's that guy.
Yeah, and I know a lot of folks were kind of disappointed the Raiders ended up taking Brock Bowers before the Saints came on the clock. To me, I was like a relief off my shoulder just because I wanted to beef up the offensive line. That's the biggest issue going into this draft. And, man, it's still a head scratcher. What are the Raiders doing with Brock Bowers?
Yeah, I think that was a silly pick by them. Just
not
in the
for
sense,
the talent, but just for the team, right?
Right. And well, what's the main critique we make about tight ends drafted in the first round is that they always seem to be playing for a different team by the time that they're really ready to impact the NFL. They're really ready to move the needle for an NFL team. And you're just setting up a situation where that's the most likely scenario that happens here is the Raiders struggle for 2 to 3 years. They don't really have a quarterback. Brock Bowers plays well, but is not going to move the needle for them. I kind of equate it to the Falcons the last couple of years. Like, yeah, you had Kyle Pitts and Kyle Pitts looked good, but who did you pair him with as a quarterback?
Right.
And now that you finally have the quarterback, you're talking about you have one more year on that rookie contract unless you want to use that 5th-year option, which is not a given. And then are you going to sign him to that massive second contract? I don't know. Because someone is. And I think you're going to end up in a very similar situation with Brock. Now, if you're bad enough this year and you can go get a top quarterback next year, great. But next year's quarterback class isn't going to be like this one. At least doesn't look like it in terms of having those top 3 guys who you'd be happy with any of them. So we'll see. But yeah, I don't think the Saints would have taken Brock even if he had gotten to 14. I think they would have strongly considered it and at the end of the day just thought better of it. But yeah, I am happy that the Raiders took that idea out of their heads because I don't think it would have been a smart move for the Saints either. But yeah, either way, this is the group that you're going to roll with, and we'll see what happens. All right, moving on to offensive line. This one's a bit more confusing just because you don't know what you're doing with Ryan Ramczyk. I'm keeping him on here now because, of course, I am. You can't eliminate him now, but there is a very strong chance that he ends up getting eliminated, at least as a kind of pup guy, right? Like I think there's a decent chance that he plays this year, but isn't ready for the start of the year. So that will save you a roster spot once you move him to the in-season pup list. You can't put him on the pup list prior to that, or he's done for the season. But he could start training camp on the pup list and you go from there. Either way, I'm keeping 10. The obvious ones are Trevor Penning, Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Taliese Fuanga, right? Past that, obviously, Ryan Ramczyk, like we talked about. Then Nick Saldiveri, who was your 4th-round pick from last year, who should compete to be your starting left guard, in my opinion. If he can't, then maybe you move on from Nick this offseason and you keep another guy. If he doesn't develop in the way you need him to. I think they're going to bank a lot on John Benton and this new coaching staff to tease more production out of some of these young guys. Then the other guys I kept are Landon Young, who's going to be your backup right tackle regardless of who starts. Oli Udoh, who I would say is going to be in that mix at left tackle, probably to be the backup for Trevor Penning, who I expect to win that job. And then the other two, Shane Lemieux is my guess right now. I think he's just a guy that you need depth on the interior line. He can play multiple positions, and I think at the end you're going to feel more comfortable with him. And then, like I said, I didn't cut any of the draft picks, so Josiah Ezram ends up being that 10th offensive lineman, probably the guy you have inactive on game days. But, you drafted him for a reason. he's not ready to play right now. So you're like, the whole point of drafting him was to develop. And I think he's not going to be a guy you want to give up on as a rookie, but we'll see. Beyond that, Tommy Kramer, Kyle Hergel, Nori Newely, Sincere Haynesworth, and Justin Herron are my cuts. Kyle Hergel's interesting because, again, he got drafted to the CFL, so he might not be there anyway, and maybe you bring in another UDFA or a veteran to fill that spot. But we'll see. And, I mean, this group could be solid. The problem is there's too many questions for a group that includes, 1, 2, 3, 4 first-round picks and then a high second-round pick. For it to be a question mark is frustrating. I can understand if you had a bunch of 6th, 7th round picks, but you don't. You have a bunch of 1st and 2nd round picks, and we're still talking about it as a weakness of this team.
You know, it's funny too, for me at least, is seeing some Saints fans on social media mad. Why haven't the Saints re-signed Andrus Peat yet? And it's like, where's all this Pete love coming from? I could still see him being part of the mix, but it's definitely not been a priority for the Saints at all. And they don't need to make it a priority.
Yeah, I can imagine that 3 years ago where you had people banging the table to bring Andrus Peat back. But I mean, if the Saints aren't bringing Andrus Peat back, it's for a reason.
Right.
And so, it's maybe it's a situation where they're waiting him out, and they want him to take a certain level of contract and he's not willing to do it. We don't really know. It's tough, but we'll see. He hasn't gotten any real action from anyone else either. The Titans brought him in for a visit.
The Titans, I remember. That was it.
Yeah, but that's it. That's the only buzz we've heard with Andrus. So who knows? We'll see. But the longer you wait, the less likely it is that you bring in Andrus. One interesting thing, and we didn't even talk about this in the wide receiver room, Jarvis Landry is going to Jaguars rookie camp.
Right.
Man, people must just not be happy with where he is physically if they're not, like, it's just it's confusing to me. You'd think he'd at least be getting shots in camps. I don't understand it.
I know he took to social media too to say he's definitely a number 2 on any team in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I mean, the other guy we haven't heard anything about from a free agent perspective, Mike Thomas. Maybe teams are waiting out that knee to make sure he's healthy, but we haven't even heard of like visits, anything. We haven't heard any buzz of like, hey, this is a guy. There's one other guy on that list too, and it's Odell Beckham Jr. I put them in similar categories in terms of veteran guys who, aren't going to just go anywhere and should still be able to impact the roster, but you just kind of don't know. Like Odell, I thought had a solid season for the Ravens, not a great season. Mike, I thought had a solid season for the Saints when he was healthy, not a great season. You can blame the quarterback if you want. The fact remains, teams are going to be watching that tape. And so, I only bring this up because we're done with the offensive side of the equation. And so, Steve, how do you feel about those projections? Any that you would change? Any that you think are wrong?
The only one that I think could, for me, was at least Jamal Williams, just because I think he still has a spot on the roster. I know it was a down year for him. I think it was a down year, obviously, all around in the run game. But think the Saints still bring him back. It will be interesting to see what he has, what he's bringing in the offseason workout program and for training camp, obviously.
I agree, too. And it's more just like, okay, if I had to pick one of these cuts that is the first cut, that is the closest to making the roster and probably will, assuming things go a certain way, it's Jamal, right? Like if I had to, I think there's 25 guys on the offense that I kept. He's the 26th guy right now. One other guy that I didn't mention, so I don't think I named the cuts at running back. So Jordan Mims, Jay Cabote, UL guy, and then James Robinson, who I don't know about you, but I had completely forgotten about in terms of actually even being on this roster. I completely forgot they signed him to a futures deal until I was going through this and be like, wait, he's still here?
Yeah, it was like you said, going down the list, and I'm like, oh yeah, James. It was one of those, James Robinson. That's right.
He's like the Eno Benjamin of last year. So hopefully his fate is not similar to Eno's. Hopefully he doesn't deal with an injury like Eno did.
Now that you bring that, who's the offensive lineman that got hurt early on for the Saints? That was a veteran.
Trey Turner.
Is he still under a contract or no?
I think he's just out there. I think he's a free agent. So they could bring him back. But yeah, I found James Robinson's name and I was like, wait, he's under contract. He is. So it'll be interesting. But Yeah, that's it for the offense. We're going to wrap this segment up. We're going to come back. We're going to go through defense and special teams. Again, similar to the offense, there's not a ton of difficult decisions to make, but there are some interesting conversations to be had. So we're going to wrap up this segment. We're going to come back. We're going to finish out this Inside Black and Gold way too early roster projection episode. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. We'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller, one more segment and one more useless roster projection that will certainly change by the time we get to the first day of practice. But we're going to go through it because I think it's a good baseline. And so we're going to start. We did the offense last segment. I think it was 25 total players on offense that we kept. That tells you on defense and special teams, you're going to have 28 because that's how math works. But, this year I did something that I haven't done previously, which is I split up defensive end, defensive tackle, and I split up cornerback and safety. In past years, I just did defensive line. I think this is a cleaner way to look at it because I do think that from a defensive line perspective, you have to consider that some of these are how many defensive ends are you keeping, how many tackles are you keeping, and how many of those defensive ends can potentially shift inside the tackle on pass downs, right? And so let's start with the defensive end spot. I'm keeping 6 of them, and there's a lot of familiar names on here. There's not a lot of questionable names in terms of who you feel like should be making the roster at defensive end, but there are a lot of questionable names in terms of how much of an impact and how many games will these guys actually play. And so the guys at the top are obvious: Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson. Those are your, the top of your depth chart. They were the biggest impact players last year. They're going to be the biggest impact players again. Hopefully Cam can bounce back in terms of some of the pass rush production that he didn't really have last year, but he's making the roster, there's no question. Then beyond that, Chase Young is the only real new name that we have. He had neck surgery, so he's not expected to miss a ton of time. He's expected to be there at some point in training camp, so he'll be out there. But again, this is a guy who's dealt with injuries his entire career. Speaking of guys who have dealt with injuries their entire career, Isaiah Foskey and Peyton Turner, neither of those guys have been able to get through a season healthy. Obviously, Isaiah only had one season, but he missed most of it, or at least more than half of it, with a quad injury that recurred on him later in the year. And so it's tough to really know what you have with him. Peyton Turner, we all know the story there. And then Tano Passanio, who is a veteran, of these 6 guys, he's probably the only one that I would think, okay, he might get cut. But I do think his versatility last year really helps him in the sense that he not only shifted inside to defensive tackle on some pass downs, he did it well, and he impacted games doing that. So I feel pretty good about that defensive end group. How do you feel about it?
Like it a lot. Interested, obviously, to see what Foskey can do in year 2 because the team obviously thinks highly of him to take him in the second round, and we just weren't able to see really much of anything. And that was early on too. So with guys like a Foskey and Turner, these are still young guys that the team has invested a lot in, that they saw in because of how high they drafted them. But just we'll see how it shakes out. But there is a lot more pieces around now, including Chase Young, and interested to see what he's going to bring coming back from neck surgery. I see on your list there a guy that was I thought showed some stuff for us was Lalos. Nico was I guess you would say one of those undrafted studs that was around.
Yeah. I mean, he had that one really good preseason game. I think it was against the Chargers, and he had like 3 sacks.
And everyone was blowing him up, right?
No, I mean, he's a good guy to have. But I think he's a practice.
It was like the greatest game ever.
Yeah. Yeah. It really was. It was a fantastic game. One of the biggest frustrations for me last year was, there was a point in that, like, Isaiah Foskey was always going to have a hard time impacting this roster when everyone was healthy because of the depth, because of the numbers. And there was a point last season where Cam Jordan actually missed a game. And that would have been a great opportunity for Isaiah to get a full allotment of reps and really put some tape out there that you could build on in a way that you can't really do with spot reps, right? And even if it was just one game, it would have been a chance for him to get a lion's share of the pass rush snaps, and he was hurt and he wasn't able to get out there. And that's really frustrating because I think you're going to be in the same situation this year. If everyone's healthy, Isaiah's not going to get on the field much because you're going to want to give most of the reps to Cam, Carl, and Chase and Peyton even. You need to see what you have in Peyton if you can.
If you can, right.
So,
I was going to say that too.
It's just tough. And so that's the frustrating part. Is that was a chance for him to really, like Kendre Miller in the final game of the regular season. Like, we never got a chance to see Isaiah in a featured role the way we were able to see Kendre in a featured role. And I feel way better about Kendre going into year 2 because of that. And I do think that Foskey, we were really critical of him early in the year. I do think that he actually did gain some ground in the developmental part of things later in the year. We just never saw that, we never got a chance to see that pan out in the field. So we'll see. But yeah, like you mentioned, Nico Lawless is one of the cuts. Nate Latu is a UDFA. He's one of the cuts. Brother Cam Latu, the tight end, not Latu Latu, the defensive end from UCLA.
I was wondering that one.
They are not related, but he is related to Cam Latu, who was a tight end out of Alabama last year. And then Trajan Jeffcoat is another UDFA. Again, like not a lot of cuts here in terms of guys that you would expect to make the roster. But if you were going to cut someone, it would probably be Tano. I don't see them cutting Peyton because, like, what's the benefit of cutting Peyton? It's like maybe you can tease a productive season out of here, and so it's not an entirely wasted pick. But if you cut him now, it'd be like selling a stock at its lowest point, and I don't think you want to do that.
It's kind of like, the more I look at it, it's kind of scary of how many questions there are still at defensive end.
Yes,
just because you don't know what Cam's going to be like this year either.
Right. I mean, past Carl, which is funny because you're talking about all of these early picks. A lot of first rounders on this list, huh? You have Cam Jordan, who's a first rounder. Carl Granderson is a UDFA out of Wyoming. Then you have Chase Young, who's a number 3 overall pick, number 2 overall pick.
Number 2, yeah.
Isaiah Foskey was a second round pick, and Peyton Turner, who was a first round pick. And then even Tano Passanio was a third round pick. Actually, no, he was a second round pick too, out of Villanova.
Yes.
So everyone on this list is either a first or second round pick other than Carl Granderson. And Carl Granderson is probably the guy you feel like is going to have the biggest impact.
Right, exactly.
So that's why when you look at the Saints draft strategies, and it's not fair to really look at Cam and say, well, it was a first round pick. Because that was one of the most successful first round picks the Saints ever made in their history. So that's not really fair. But all the other guys, you're like, man, there's a lot of draft investment in the guys that have not really done anything. So anyway, let's move on to defensive tackle. This is a group that, I want to keep more. I wish I could keep more, but I just don't think you can keep more than 4. Colin Saunders, Brian Brzee, Nathan Shepard, Christian Boyd, who was the 6th round pick out of Northern Iowa. I think that's a solid group. As long as they're healthy, you feel good about it. Malcolm Roach is gone, so that's kind of opens up some space in the rotation. I do think you could get away with keeping 3 here and maybe try to stash Christian Boyd on the practice squad. Because you have some of that inside-out versatility with Peyton Turner and Tano Passanio. But I think you'd like to keep Christian Boyd on the roster. I think he is a guy that would be tough to stash. He could be claimed somewhere. But yeah, that's a pretty simple group. But I need to see Christian do something during training camp for him to stick on this line. I think between him and Josiah, one of those guys has a pretty good chance of getting cut. And it's just a question of where you feel like you need bigger depth.
Yeah, and with Brzee, I'm obviously really excited to see how he develops into year 2 because he had a solid season for rookie year.
Yeah, I need to see him be more effective against the run. I need to see him to be a more 3-down type defensive tackle. Last year, he was really more of a pass rush guy, and while he had a really good season, I think he did have a role in why they struggled to contain mobile quarterbacks, and because a lot of it's rush integrity, a lot of it's just not getting outside of your frame and understanding, you can't always, all 5 guys can't be always just pinning their ears back and trying to get upfield. They have to be containing and keeping their lane integrity. And I think when he struggled last year in pass rush, that's what he struggled with. He also needs to work on pad level, not getting moved. And that's what makes it more of a struggle in the rundowns because he's a bigger guy. He's a very long frame. It's, if your pad level isn't good as a taller guy, these defensive tackles can just get under you and take all of your leverage away. And that's how you get moved. And that's how they create those big rushing lanes. So that's something I need to see him improve. But I think he had a really good rookie season. And he is a guy who's going to impact the pass rush. And, I'm hopeful that he can continue to develop in that way. But I feel pretty good about this group.
Yeah. I know a lot of folks were critical, though, of Shep and Saunders last year. But I thought overall it was a decent year one in black and gold for them.
They didn't stop the run well enough. Like the defensive tackle group needs to be better in run stuffing. Like run defense has to be better. But part of that is the mobile quarterback stuff. Like you didn't see a lot of running backs go wild throughout the course of games. You saw halves where running backs did well. I think the first half against the Texans, Devin Singletary and I can't remember the other guy. They had a really strong first half. The first half against the Colts, Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor both had a really strong first half. But you were able to kind of clamp down on that throughout the course of the season, and it wasn't a consistent issue. It just cropped up at points. So I need to see them be more consistent, and I think Brian kind of developing into that more all-around defensive tackle, I think that'll go a long way. Moving to linebacker, I'm keeping 6 of them, which might be a stretch, but I don't know. Like, I think with this new special teams kind of dynamic, Darren Rizzi is going to have a little bit more sway than he might have in other seasons to say, I need this guy because special teams. I need this guy to be able to run down and make tackles on kickoffs. And that's going to mean cornerbacks, safeties, linebackers. Those are your prime options as those special team coverage guys. And I think you have a couple of them here. So obviously the reason 6 seems like a lot for linebacker is because most of the time you're only going to have 2 on the field. So how many do you actually need? But with the coverage needs, I think is going to be 1 more that you keep. So Demario Davis, Pete Werner, obviously those are your starters. Willie Gay, guy from the Chiefs, I do think that he's going to be pretty much a shoe-in, and he's going to compete for that will spot. He's going to push Pete Werner. I think Pete's still going to win it, but he's going to be right there. He can also play the Sam. So I think he's safe. DeMarco Jackson, I think, is going to be one of your core special teamers. So I think he's safe. And then the next question is, how many more do you keep? I think there's a scenario you get into where you do have to decide. You end up keeping 5 and you have to decide one or the other, right? This is one of those things where it's like, would I rather keep Jamal Williams or an extra linebacker? And in this case, I'm keeping that extra linebacker. So Kalike Hudson is the free agent you signed from the Commanders. I think that he's a special teams play, and he's going to show out on special teams. And then Jalen Ford is similar in that way. He's a rookie. I want to keep him. I think Jalen Ford can make Kalike redundant if you feel like Jalen can get the job done as a rookie. But right now, I'm going to go with that group.
Yeah, I see Orgy on the out list, and he was just a guy that never really made that next step a year ago, I felt like.
He played well enough to keep him around.
Right.
I think that they like him. I'm just not sure he's going to supplant any of these guys. I think he's a guy you bring back and put on the practice squad again. But we'll see. Isaiah Stallbird and Monty Rice are the other 2 cuts, and you're going to go from there. And again, it's like there's some UDFAs who could make an impact. There's just positions on this team that are going to be a lot easier than others for a depth guy to make. And I just think linebacker is a tough one for a guy like Orgy to make an impact. But if he shows up and plays significantly better than Kalike Hudson, I could see him being in that conversation.
The fear there is, when is that cliff going to come for a guy like Demario Davis, who has been so damn good?
Yeah, it does feel like it's never it's out there somewhere, but
right
where?
And it's like, why? How dare you say that? You're going to jinx him, right? It's going to be funny
because like you talk about, he looks at LeBron as kind of his idol in terms of longevity, and I think it's fair because I watch LeBron play, and I'm like, he's so old. How is he still doing this? And it's like, because it's like, yeah, he's old. He's not the LeBron that he was at like 28, but it's still like, this is a top 10 NBA player.
Yes.
Right. And like the drop off has not been tangible in the fact that you're like, well, he needs to retire because he's not good enough. Like same thing with Demario. Like I have not seen any tangible drop off. Statistically, he just had his 2 best seasons. So what is he, 35? He could play till he's 40. I think DA joked that he thinks he's going to play till he's 50. I don't know if anyone was going to do it, it'd be him. But let's move on to cornerback. I'm keeping 4 of them. And it's a good list. It's the second year in a row you go in with feeling really good about your list. Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry. And when you lay it out like that, it seems like, Kool-Aid was a luxury pick, but he's only your 4th corner. It's not like he's your 5th or 6th corner. He's basically taken the spot that Ike Adam had last year. And
right.
I mean, that was a valuable spot. Like, it's not like you went all season. You're like, why do they still have Ike? Ike played a lot. And all it's going to take is one injury, and suddenly you're looking at that. And what I like about Kool-Aid, and maybe not this year, maybe you have he might not be your backup slot this year, but what I like about Kool-Aid as a prospect for this year and beyond is he has the potential to be your backup at all 3 defensive back spots, right? Like he could be right. He could go in at right outside corner. He can go in at left outside corner, and I think he profiles well to be a slot corner as well.
And I think DA mentioned they're going to train him, get him practice reps at both.
They are, right. So I just think that's versatility that you feel really good about because Ike was not that. Ike was not a slot corner. Ike was an outside corner, and you had Ugo Amadi was your backup slot corner. I do think I'm getting more and more to the side of I don't think Marshawn gets moved, and so Alontae Taylor goes back to the slot, and you're hoping that he can have a better year there. He can continue to improve as a slot corner because you need to get him on the field. You can't afford to not put him on the field. So that's going to be interesting, but it's only going to take one injury. And then that question becomes, okay, if you do end up in a scenario where one of the outside corners gets hurt, and we've seen it. Paulson Adebo has been hurt each of the last 2 seasons. Marshawn Lattimore has been hurt each of the last 2 seasons. There have been games to be played, and the question becomes, okay, do you move Alontae outside and make him the outside corner in that situation, or do you move Kool-Aid into that? And that's going to be something that we have to see develop throughout camp in terms of the depth chart. But I think you'd be comfortable either way. And I don't know, like, we can complain that they keep spending all these assets on cornerback, but I like going into a season looking at this list and being like, that's a hell of a cornerback list.
The only thing that concerns me, obviously, we saw the nickel experiment with Alontae not pan out last year. I don't know what's going to be different with that this season.
Well, it's going to be
just
a second
more
year.
Reps.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to go into it and you're going to feel like you learned things from last year and you're going to improve upon them. I mean, he has the ability to play in the slot. It's not like from a aptitude perspective, he can't do it. He needs to get better. And he's only his second year in the NFL. It's not like we're talking about a 5-year pro.
No, I don't want to say it's like he is not trying, but I just don't know if there's that want to for that nickel role either, if you know what I mean.
See, I disagree. I think one of the things that worked against him last year is the Saints were not sure what they wanted to do with him. And he spent a lot of training camp, a time when you would ideally be honing in on that one job and getting better at that job, right? He didn't spend all training camp working at the nickel. Bradley Roby spent most of training camp playing the nickel. So during that really important time that he could have been using to really lock in on that, he was competing with Paulson Adebo to potentially be the starting outside corner. And so I'd like to think that you come back this year, he is getting all of those reps at the slot corner position, knowing the things that he struggled with last year and knowing the things he needs to work on. And then this year you can be a better version of yourself in that spot. That's the half glass full way to look at that. Now, there's also a scenario where, hey, he can't hack it at inside corner. It's just not what he does, and that's not where he's best suited. And you find another way. But I'm not gonna give up on him in that spot just because he didn't have a great year last year doing that. It's just a question of you need to coach him up, and he needs to be better. And you're gonna give him the chance to do that, is my point. And I don't think you're wrong to do that. But you do have a guy in Kool-Aid who could potentially be your slot corner. You signed a guy in Will Harris who could potentially be your slot corner. Ugo Amadi could be your slot corner. So you're going to learn a lot in camp, I think, and you're going to see in these preseason games what he has kind of gained. But for now, I do think that you're going to go in there with him. The cuts, Rajon Wright, Lawrence Johnson, Shamar John Charles, and Rico Payton, nothing exactly super exciting. But 4 cornerbacks, and I think you're okay with that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, the one area we know that DA's expertise is obviously that group.
Right. And you do feel like you've developed corners over the course of time.
For sure.
So it's not a situation where you feel like, oh, well, we just can't do it. It's not like quarterback where, you just never have proven that you're able to develop a quarterback. Now down to safety, I'm keeping 5 of them. Millard, Bradford, and Faion Hicks are the cuts. But the keeps are Tyrann Mathieu, Jonathan Abram, Jordan Howden, Ugo Amadi, JT Gray. Will Harris is also going to be on my cut line right now. I'll add it in real time because I just don't know enough about him to say, hey, he's going to make the roster. Now, we'll see how that pans out in camp. But for now, I'm going to assume that Ugo Amadi is that extra safety. I'm going to assume that Jonathan Abram and Jordan Howden are going to compete for that starting job across from Tyrann Mathieu. And JT Gray is your special teams ace. You could probably convince me that they need an extra safety. I need an extra defensive back as a kind of coverage person. But for now, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, you mentioned that right there. The safety position, still a lot of questions there. I'm curious, besides Tyrann, is it going to be Abram or Howden as the other starter?
Yeah. I put my money on Abram. I'm just going to be honest. I really do think that they were impressed with what he did at the end of last season. And, it's going to be a situation where you can just continue to have Jordan Howden play the dime role and allow Tyrann to kind of roam on those third down, third and medium, third and long. And I just think you probably have a little more trust in Abram at this point. But we'll see. I mean, again, it's, not unlike Alontae Taylor. It's a situation where, hey, you didn't know what you were going to do with Jordan last year. So you kind of just had him all everywhere, and it's a lot of kind of sensory overload. And now that you have a more defined idea of what he can do, he can work on that, and he can really kind of target that in camp and get better. I think I wouldn't be surprised if Abram is the starter to begin the year and Howden is the starter to finish the year. But either way, I like that group. I do think, you could convince me that Amadi and Harris switch, but that's just something that we'll figure out in camp.
Yeah, I thought Ugo was kind of in that category, along with who just went to San Fran?
Lonnie John. Oh, Ike Adam.
I thought he was in the same category, kind of as Yadam, whereas definitely a valuable contributor.
I wouldn't put him as high as Yadam in the sense that he just didn't get as many opportunities. But when he did play, he played reasonably well. He didn't go in there and that week 1 he had to come in off the bench and he almost he knocked the ball away, should have intercepted it. I think it was probably an uncalled offensive pass interference. But no, I mean you feel good about him. I think he played well. I don't think that you went into this offseason disappointed in what you got out of him, and I think it looks good in that 0. So I keep going. But all right, that's the last defensive spot. We do still have specialists. We don't need to spend a ton of time on it. I don't think you make any changes at specialists. I think Zach Wood, Blake Grupe, Lou Hedley are your guys. You signed Charlie Smith, you signed Matt Highball, and great. Charlie Smith is a kicker. Matt Hayball is a punter. I keep vacillating between Hayball and Highball. I still haven't figured out exactly the correct way to say it. But I don't think these are guys you brought in as like, oh yeah, they're gonna really, like you brought them in as competition, yes, but you didn't bring them in as you are bringing guys in because you don't trust the other two guys. I think a lot of the reason there was a lot of agita-inducing moments with Blake and Lou is that you were sitting there watching 2 rookie specialists, and that's always going to be a tough situation. Now, you don't want to be in that situation every year, right? Like, you sat through that because you had to, because you chose that, and that's where you were. But that's not a good scenario. You don't want to constantly be trusting a rookie if you can avoid it. And I don't think either had a bad enough season that you're like, we got to replace him. Especially Blake. I think Blake is safe, assuming that he can directionally kick on the kickoffs. Like we've talked about that. Is the kickoff game, distance doesn't matter anymore. Like literally, it makes no difference how far you can kick it. It's about where you can place it. If you kick it into the end zone, they get it at the 30. If you kick it short of the end zone, you can potentially pin them. So the ability to kind of and hang time doesn't matter because the coverage can't start running until he catches the ball. So it's going to be more about where you can place it in that way. And I think that's going to be the only way that Charlie kind of makes hay on, okay, maybe he could win that job. But that's going to be something we have to watch and see. Because I don't know. Blake played soccer. I think he can directionally kick. Lou Hedley, again, I think people were overly critical of his rookie season because they weren't necessarily looking at what he was being asked to do versus what he was doing. And I think he executed the job that he was asked to do pretty close to as well as you could hope for. Now, there were some moments early in the season that were shaky. But again, you're talking about a rookie. And if you don't think you're going to bring in a rookie punter and have some shaky moments, whether it's Matt or literally anyone else, you're kidding yourself.
It's pretty darn clear, though. Rizzy loves that Australian-style punter.
Yeah, that's what Matt is, right? Vanderbilt guy. You know, and maybe he does do it better. Maybe he is a better option, but I'm not going to make the decision now. I need to see it happen. Like they're not bringing in these two guys because they're like, we desperately need to replace these guys. If they have incredible training camps and force your hand, that's another question. But as of now, that's not where I am.
It will be cool to see Headley and Hayball, since they are same style of guy. You can get a pretty good read on what's going on.
That's true. Yeah. I mean, like, because they do play similarly, you know, it's going to, I agree. But I also think there's a scenario where Headley comes in and has worked on a lot and knows, again, it's like you're talking about year 1 to year 2, right? That's typically time you see a lot of improvement. What will be funny is seeing Charlie Smith and Blake Grupe stand next to each other and do the same job, because I think Blake Grupe is 5'7", 160 pounds soaking wet, and Charlie Smith is like 6'4". He played rugby. Or Gaelic football, which is basically rugby and soccer.
Much different body types. Yes, indeed.
A little bit. But all right, let's wrap up that segment. Let's wrap up this episode of Inside Black and Gold. Another long one, but we got there. We made it. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. I think our plan for the next 2 episodes is to split up the UDFA class and do kind of meet the UDFAs. We'll do half of them on the first episode of next week, half of them on the second episode of next week, leading into rookie minicamp, which should be that weekend. I don't know what the availability is, but typically they'll have one day where we can go out there and watch practice. They'll open the locker room so we can go in there and talk to a lot of these guys. And so that's going to be where a lot of that content comes from the following week. We're also going to have the schedule release coming out sometime soon. So we'll have an episode on that whenever it does come out. We'll kind of go through. I like to put down my predictions for every game. They're almost always wrong, but it's a good way to kind of introduce yourself to the schedule and what it's going to look like. You know, one of my predictions from last year that everyone kind of made fun of me for at the time was that Rams game in week 16, week 17, week 16, right? It was week 16. Yeah. That Rams game in week 16 was going to be very difficult for the Saints to win because they had to go across country on a Thursday night. And at the time, and I can show you the comments, people were like, they're not going to lose to the Rams. The Rams suck. Well, I think at the end of the day, we saw a team that was not that bad, first of all. Like, the Rams were much better than people give them credit for. But also, like, the story of that game was the Saints weren't ready to play. So, like, that's the type of thing that I think you can go through the schedule and kind of identify early on of, like, where did this team kind of get screwed on the schedule? Because there are schedule losses. And that's one of the few things that, whether, you know, you don't know who's going to play in certain games. You don't know what the injury situation is going to be, where you're going to be at in your season by that point, who's going to be eliminated early, who's going to be so far ahead. They rest the last couple of weeks, that sort of thing. But you can identify, like, oh, okay, this is a tough stretch. This is going to be where if you can't win these games, you're going to have a hard time getting to the postseason. So that's going to be an episode we do at some point. I don't know what it's going to be because I don't think they've officially announced as of right now when the schedule is going to be announced, but we will find out pretty soon. But those are going to be the next few episodes. So if you have a calendar that you keep up with, go ahead. I don't personally. So that's why I say it out loud so I can remember.
No, you mentioned the Rams do there too. Let's hope the Saints 5th round picks hit like the Rams did.
Did they get Puka in the 5th round?
What was that?
Where'd they get Puka?
Puka and Kyron Williams were 5th rounders.
They're both 5th rounders.
Yeah. So let's hope we get that kind of success.
Bub. Think Bub can be the next Puka?
I hope so.
Bub and Puka sounds like a
name,
ABC sitcom. Bub and Puka taking on the world. Okay. That's it. That's all we got. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. This has been Inside Black and Gold. Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller, as always. Follow us at Saints_pod. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. If you're watching this on YouTube, smash that subscribe button, ring the bell. And we're creeping up. We didn't get to 10K before the draft, but we should be there soon. So thanks everyone for our new listeners. I know we gained several hundred subscribers since last week, so that's always nice to see. A lot of great content. If you haven't checked it out, we have interviews with Spencer Rattler, which we played a clip of earlier in this show. We have interviews with Talia Sifuanga, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Roman Harper talking about the Saints draft class, all that good stuff. So make sure to check it out. And we're going to keep going. How you feeling, Steve?
Doing good. Yeah, definitely go to WWL.com. Check it all out. Jeff has been killing it on the web.
Been killing myself.
Killing yourself too, right?
We'll leave it at that. But all right. Who dat? Go Saints. BZL.
Let's go black and gold.